Hi everyone, and thank you for coming on this joyous occasion to talk all things Samuel Ross and all things SRA engineered by Zara. I'm Lynette Nylander. I am the Executive Digital Director of Harper's Bazaar, but more importantly, I am a fan of the gentleman to my right and the gentleman to my left, and this collaboration, this meeting of the minds. John is an entrepreneur, a polymath, and the creative thinker around the medium of food. Sam Ross is a fashion designer and artist. I mean, I've known both of them for a really long time. Sam from when I lived in London, John from when I moved to New York. But I think it'd be really interesting to explain how you two both know each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget the day I met John, because for the first time in design, I felt like I'd seen someone who I could relate to. It was in maybe 2012, 2013 Salone, right?
It gets blurry pre-pandemic, but somewhere in that zone.
It was just refreshing to see someone from the other side of the pond that was part of the diaspora who kind of saw things in a similar way, and we kind of felt we were on the cusp of newness coming into the industry. There were new players that, when you kind of study the fields of applied arts, just didn't exist in the history and lexicon of it. So when you go to these places, you start seeing other adventurers basically with the same curiosity. It resonates, and you just don't forget things like that.
Yeah, it was a breath of fresh air to see you, because like you said, it felt like they were hiding something from us. It's like, hold on, wait, this is going on once a year.
Yeah.
And it just opened a lot of doors and a lot of eyes to see what was happening in the design space, how that coalesced with the art space, and to see you there, and you're younger than me, and to see that curiosity, I was like, all right, the kids are all right.
Where does your work converge, and what do you admire?
Well, I think that the thing that we both have in common is that we both are keen to tell stories.
Yeah.
And we use food as a medium to tell stories of the global South, of the global majority, and looking at the intersection of art, design, fashion, and all things culture, and how these things meet, and figuring out how to connect and combust and bring some radical ideas to these spaces.
100%. It's almost as though we both have this interest or penchant for the hidden parts of society.
Yeah.
Being able to kind of turn that stone or that coin and be able to reflect that to other people who are part of that, which is the global majority, is probably at the crux of what we do.
Right.
And also finding a way to make that an emotional experience that kind of resonates with people is probably how we overlap.
Sam, I want to talk to you about your evolving relationship to garment making. What makes this reiteration a good idea for the now? I'm really interested in how the collection is really rooted in dressing for now.
Yeah, I think the role of an artist and designer is to reflect society. You're supposed to reflect the times that you're in at that moment.
Yeah.
And to be open to hearing and seeing and feeling what is actually happening. And actually what we need are really pragmatic, earnest and honest solutions through the medium of fashion.
Yeah.
And this idea of a garment system which is at the right price, which is everything here is under 315 USD, with the same fabrics that you see on, top end brands,
Yeah.
is a searing edge to say, no, actually, this is what the new standard should be based on how people feel and what they need for now.
Yeah.
So I think there's just a radical honesty in proposing a solution like this.
And you talked a lot about this idea of access, and I think that's what makes this such an interesting proposition, is that access, and who can see it, who can envisage themselves in it, and why that matters. And I want you to talk a little bit about that.
I think it's important that you need to tell a story and represent more a human and global group of people who you actually resonate with. We got into this weird silo where we're all in fashion together, but we want to find ways to separate ourselves, even though we all want to be in the same space together. And I think price has been that barrier. If you think about access, it deteriorates the barrier and actually focuses a little bit more on affinities and connections, which you might call community or similar interests. So I think what we're trying to do here is say, you can have shared interests, you can have a particular sensibility, but that doesn't need to be determined by price as a barrier.
And you've thought a lot about that in terms of the aspects and elements of design, and in terms of the fabrication, you've been really careful about wanting to lean towards more of an organic way of looking at materials and seeing how they all come together. Why was that important?
You know, like around the time I had the first White Cube show, I started getting into tailoring, and I spent a lot of time in Zara in London. And the more I understood, again, as like someone very new to the space of tailoring, the quality of fabric choices they made were all about breathability, comfort. So in this collection, a lot of what you're going to be seeing are washed and are mottled and waxed cottons, organic jerseys, herringbones, and that's where I'm actually starting to bear my own personal preferences of how we should engage with material and fabric into the clothing solutions that are being proposed here. You're not seeing ultraviolet block flat colors with perfectly placed prints. You're seeing the hand of the artisan and the screen printer in the imperfections and the uniqueness in each of the print details. There's something there about making clothes that feel human and more delicate. That is just a case of maturing as a designer.
Sam's written or proposed 10 tenets of the line. How would you describe the tenets I'm about to read out?
I guess they're like principles, and the principles aren't super heady. It's more just since like the sale of a Cold Wall, my business partner Yi and I have had time just to kind of like observe and travel and think about what it is just to be human and live. And we've tried to base some of these words on just what it is to move through society.
So it's garment system, comfort, leisure, respite, dissolving price barriers, an increased focus on organic and craft components, social mobility, relaxed, elegant uniforms, durable, discreet, wearable, tailoring, and a global majority focus. The first one I'm going to pull out is leisure. So why is leisure, or the idea of leisure, important when you're thinking about this?
I think it comes almost down to like comfort and like casual movement, where you might do a bit of calisthenics and then you might go into a meeting and you might go for a coffee run and then you might catch up with some friends. It's like finding ways to have maybe 1 to 2 outfits that are appropriate for all those tasks that you don't need to think about. And a huge part of having this really like pragmatic list is that we're talking about normal aspects of everyday life and trying to use design to solve problems there. And
I think it's really interesting how you spoke about the idea of growing up and that your uniform or your aesthetic changes with that, and you want to kind of almost stay true to yourself. Your life is different. And how have you thought about kind of the aspects of that with this?
I don't want to feel like I should have to compromise my essence or my background or cultural nuances or, preferences in terms of style and material. I don't want to lose that to then feel like I'm part of society. We all need to go into a bank to do check-in. We all need to go and look at raising a mortgage. We all need to go into, if you've got younger family members going to like a parents' evening or school evening, I want to make sure that we have garments that are well suited for reality, because we already have amazing stories being told in the more conceptual parts of fashion. Gorkpor is doing great on its own, but what about that middle space between the liminal space? What clothes go there? What are the clothes for the silent moments and the moments of respite? And that's where these keywords in this collection really came into life.
I feel like you operate from a space of respite and leisure. You can be in the most formal situation ever and it always feels like John's time. So how does that kind of everyday leisure show up for you?
I think that's a hot take, but...
It's a hot take, but it's the truth.
But for me, I always prioritize comfort, right? Because Robert Niro once said in Heat, you gotta be ready to move in 30 seconds or less when the heat is on. So I don't know if I'm gonna have to dip and dodge. You just gotta be ready for whatever. So taking the concept of less is more and building a wardrobe, right? But being able to build a wardrobe and not having to spend $7,000 on a jacket, having pieces that will stand the test of time due to their construction, due to the fabrication, that are more sensitive to the environment.
The most interesting point of fashion is the anthropological understanding of why people wear things that they wear and the messages and the stories that they tell before you've even gotten to speak to the person. That, to me, will always be the enduring, idea of what interests me about fashion. And I think that you've really always astutely understood that. That leads me really perfectly into kind of the dissolving price barriers, because you feel comfortable working on those different levels. So you have this line which is really about access, but you also are working on a line that's positioned more bespoke, is that?
Yeah, we launched the Atelier line in October of last year.
Yeah.
And we only really work with Dover Street Market on it. It's all hand painted and crafted in the UK, Italy and Japan. So on one side we have this like pursuit of craft, which is, you know, very low quantity, only with ateliers, only with artisans. We're making a very small amount of product. And it's more about conservation and like procurement of garments, which then go into academia, institutions and museums like SCAD now. They have like a few pieces that haven't been shown before. And on the other end, it's also like rooting ourselves in reality. So then what am I doing to actually serve them and to serve the populace in terms of garments that they can live and work in?
Tailoring is one. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I do want you to shout out the kind of, you went and studied with Savile, or you went and observed Savile Row tailors, right? To kind of infuse those tailoring techniques into what you're doing. So why is tailoring a part of these kind of core tenets too?
I think with tailoring, you can't hide. You know, like you are cutting and you're working with like a master cutter, and there's no space to hide. And I think that's what's really enticing about designing ready to wear, is that you can't hide. In, you know, ideas which might be more avant-garde or based on runway, there's a lot of space to make that more so like a piece of artistic communication, which means it's not really about how it works with the body at times. It's actually more about the shapes and forms, cladding the body and telling their own story. But when it comes to ready to wear, it has to work with the body. It has to fit in a particular way. The weights need to be set in a very specific way. And Savile Row, it's iconic, and it's still the highest level when it comes to actual artisans and craftspeople. Like without Savile Row, we don't have a McQueen.
You know, to give a food example of, I think of tempura, right? A lot of people think about Japan when they think about tempura, but that technique got to Japan through the Portuguese, right? So I think it's like this, I think the interesting point is always at the collision of culture, of ideas, of class. I think interesting things happen where they meet, which is why I think a city like New York is interesting, because you go on a subway, everybody's there. You know what I'm saying? And it's like all of these ideas, you could have got off on 96th Street, you might have got on 149th, and y'all all are going to Canal Street. So it's like this kind of universe where it all comes together, I think is where the best magic happens.
100%.
SRA Engineered by Zara was profiled in this weekend's Financial Times How to Spend It. If you haven't read it, I really recommend you doing so. And one of the things you said in it was, it's about an item within the collaboration. It's neither a hoodie nor a suit. This is an offering for the space in between. And I thought that quote was an interesting discussion point, because I know you have strong feelings about the redundancy of the idea of streetwear, and maybe how the language that we have right now when it comes to apparel and the kind of stratas of apparel kind of let down a lot of people.
It goes back to solving this conundrum of what does it mean to be a member of the global majority and to move through different spaces in modernity and feel as though the clothes are appropriate for those spaces. But it's not to say that different generations can't change what it means for them. So I think here we've tried to not focus too much on like terminology and really just focus on making like really good individual garments. Hence why we've kind of pushed this idea of like a garment system, because it immediately removes itself from any type of wear or placement. It's a series of solutions to be worn, and they can be worn high or low or left or right, but they're just beautiful pieces to be integrated into a wardrobe.
I just gotta say, I'm really happy to be on this panel with y'all, because I haven't heard the word hence live in a long time. So shout out to the Brits.
One thing I want to talk to you both about is this idea of having a polymath spirit, because you both share that. And you're both not afraid of trying, and you're not afraid of, I don't want to use the word failure, but kind of diversions of course and things feeling and looking different than how you envisaged. How do you, I guess, move through that? What inspires you to continually need to keep making? Because I think that's inspiring for the people that are listening.
Well, my I guess polymath approach is definitely rooted in my neurology. I have ADD, but also just deep curiosity. And I think also coming from, like, one thing that my mother, she socialized me in an interesting way. Like, I grew up in public housing before I moved to Co-op City, but I went to the 92nd Street Y for day camp and summer camp, right? I looked at the old picture, I was like the only black kid in the joint. So I think that gave me a certain level of confidence to move through spaces where I just never felt any type of inferiority, where I felt like my ideas mattered and I was the best one to execute them. So I think a lot of my drive and my passion comes from the privilege I have to traverse the world and see so many things and have a perspective or opinion or how to imagine these things that I've seen differently.
Yeah.
And a deep desire to exercise that. So that's kind of like the impetus for the polymathematic side. And Ghetto Gastro was an excuse to create a world with my brothers where we could do so many different things. Like, I'm not a chef. I was smart because I like to eat, to befriend some chefs, so I know I won't go hungry. But it's like, yeah, so it's like from collaborating with the best blacksmith in Japan to make a blade, right? To linking with like one of the people that has the oldest olive trees in southern Italy to make a olive oil. We were able to create a platform just to exercise a lot of our passions.
And I mean, that's something that you must identify with. I've never seen someone who has quite so many strings to their bow. Like, you just have that tenacity to create. It's almost like you feel an insatiable need to continue to kind of till the soil. And, you know, if the hourglass is this way, you've got to turn it the other way. Do you think you're a bit obsessed with creating?
Yeah, it's like breathing. I think it started from basically coming from a really like creative household, super bohemian, but we had no money. So like, if you're poor, you will never want to return to it. So one part is probably, I am not going back to that, and that's fine now, but it becomes like a way of like freedom and escapism through creativity. And then it starts to mature from just being expressive, and then you kind of might study it here and there. Then it becomes about like solving problems that you see. It might be gaps in the market. And then it becomes about proposing solutions for questions that maybe haven't been asked. And then you're starting to determine the future. But it becomes this amazing game. It's just like the game of life, you know, and like the card many of us started with was very low. But you can determine and redetermine where you wish to go if you just have the commitment to do so. And that's the only way to kind of like expedite the journey. You have to determine your own future, or you need to find a pack to run with, and then you spar with one another. But I guess from what we've seen over the last like decade and a half of culture, there's no point thinking about who you're looking at now. You need to think about who's in your generation, because in the next 20 years, they're going to take all those spots and all those seats. And you've got to think about the long game.
One thing I'll just add on is that to do this requires a insane amount of discipline. Samuel's one of the most disciplined cats I know. I say you have to like pick your pain point, you know, the pain in doing the work or the pain and the regret of not doing the work, you know, and the choice is yours.
How does this conversation and its themes kind of go beyond just the clothes? Is it about, you know, how are we constantly having conversations or creating work that feels like it can live on multiple latitudes? Is it about functionality? I'm interested in how we can connect what is happening in this room and with this collection to our wider thought processes.
Well, what I see and what I'm inspired by looking at this collection and this partnership is really a great marriage of idea and infrastructure, and without watering it down. Because I know Samuel, so I can see that it's his vision.
There's two kind of sides of the coin here. One is a garment system that speaks to the times and is really searingly honest, and it's priced correctly, and it has an elegance to it, but it also has the signatures that myself and the team have been refining over the past decade. That's already kind of taken care of. And the second component would be continuous stakes in the ground of like where you head to. And in our practice, we're really keen to ensure that we keep pushing the needle of what can be possible and what we can believe is possible. The garments are exceptional, but there's also the ideology behind the garments, which is just as interesting here.
That's a perfect way to end. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
John, Sam.
Give it up for Lynette.
Lynette.
Oh, thank you.
That was wonderful.
Very nice of you. You're so eloquent.
Action time.